Thanks, Mustafa. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Divina. I think, some of you know me, but just for those who don't, I'm the operational manager at INACH, and I just want to welcome everyone to our first member webinar, so hosted by us, and which will be led by our member global project against hate and extremism. So for those who don't know INACH, we're the International Network Against Cyber Hate. We combat hate using a holistic approach that combines monitoring, content removal, educational methods, international cooperation, advocacy, and technology. We have more than 30 members worldwide, and we're all working on trying to make the internet a better place by, as our motto says, bringing the online in line with human rights. And one of our newest initiative and event is this member webinar. And the idea behind this was really to shine a brighter light on our members and on their work and basically just give them the stage. So yeah, without further ado, I'll give the floor to our dear colleagues, Heidi and Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. I really appreciate it. Can't tell you how much we're so glad to be here with all these, our favorite ENOC members, and, been working with ENOC for several years and just absolutely been a pleasure. So I'm Heidi Byrick, co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. It's nice to see so many friendly faces. And Mustafa, if you've made me a co-chair or co-host, I'm gonna put up our presentation now. Hopefully I will do it correctly. Okay, Charlotte, give me a thumbs up if it looks right. Okay, thanks. Well, you can see here my information and that of Wendy, my co-founder, the two of us co-founders of the new organization. We've been around for about 2 years now. I'd encourage folks to look at our website as well at globalextremism.org. We have a newsletter you can sign up for, so please do that. And we're going to speak today about the Global Project's work, holistically, all of its work, with a big focus on the stuff that we do in the online space. This is our mission. The Global Project Against Hate and Extremism exists to strengthen and educate a diverse global community committed to exposing and countering racism, bigotry, and hatred, to promote human rights values, and to work towards a flourishing, inclusive societies and democracies, but very much in line with what Charlotte said about ENOC's work as well. We basically have 4 buckets of work that we do. The first is to document extremism in various forms and hate in the real world, as well as in the tech world, so that we can do something to disrupt hateful transnational movements. And our focus is on the transnational. We exist to look at how hate is spread across borders, and also with a focus on how Americans spread hate into other countries. We also do work on holding tech companies accountable, which we'll talk about, work in the policy realm here in the United States and abroad. And we're involved in quite a few coalitions, both domestically and internationally, including obviously ENOC. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we track hate movements in the real world, and then I'm going to turn it over to Wendy to talk about our online work. So we spent a whole lot of time on investigative journalism, essentially, to try to document what is happening out there in the real world in terms of extremist movements. This work has ranged from looking at, here in the United States, what the fallout from January 6th was. This is an editorial that we both Wendy and I worked on, that showed that 6 months after January 6th, some of the groups that caused the most trouble that day, groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, were far from hampered by the prosecutions that are happening in the United States. In fact, to some extent, for example, the Proud Boys are a larger, more active organization today, even with a bunch of their leadership in the dock. Some of this work also involves tracking things like their Telegram channels. We've also written, this is with FES. I know Francisca is here from FES in Berlin, or she might be taking call, but she's going to be here, on how there were connections between Americans and Southeastern European white supremacists. Some of this touches a little bit on American neo-Nazis who have traveled to the Ukraine region to train on both sides of the war prior to Putin's recent invasion. And we feel it's very important that we document these real world trends, because we need to remember that extremism exists both online and offline, and there's an interaction between these two things. We need to be aware of where it's happening either way. Some other work we did recently was on QAnon. And basically, this is a crazy conspiracy theory birthed here in the United States that alleges, Hollywood actors and Democrats are involved in child trafficking rings. And what's weird about QAnon is it's now become quite popular in many, many other countries, many European countries, and as far away as Japan. You would think that an sort of idiosyncratic American idea wouldn't have spread far and wide, but you would be wrong if you thought that way. And then, as I said at the beginning, a big part of our work is to look at how Americans export bigotry and hate into other countries. And I should say that we look at all forms of bigotry and hate. So, this could be anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-woman, obviously anti-Semitic, racist, etc. We have done quite a bit of work lately on how major American organizations, this report that you're looking at is about an organization called Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a legal outfit that has a huge, multi-million-dollar budget every year. Their lawyers have won quite a few cases restricting women's rights and LGBTQ rights in front of the Supreme Court here in the United States, but they are also networked in to organizations in many parts of Europe, groups like Ordo Juris in Poland, Citizen Go in Spain. So we're also keeping track of how that kind of hate is being exported from the United States into other places. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Wendy to talk about our tech work.
Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Va, as Heidi said, co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. Heidi, are you going to?
Yes.
Okay. So we cannot address the issue of far-right extremism, the transnational nature of it, how the movements go from the US to other countries without obviously addressing the role of tech companies in this phenomenon. But just to show, just most recently, obviously the tragic and murderous war invasion of Ukraine, there's not so much we can do, but that we can do as individuals, but the tech companies could do a lot. And so right away with Never Again Association, which is a member of ENOC, and another organization, Quality Labs, we put out a statement calling for all the tech companies to block the disinformation coming out of Russia, because there was, for some reason, they couldn't seem to get their heads around how this should be managed. So immediately we did that. Of course, there was some movement, but not enough. A couple of weeks later, we, with another coalition here in the US called Change the Terms, issued a demand to YouTube to block RT and Sputnik, not just in Russia and some of the EU countries, but across the globe, because it was disinformation, it was lies, and it was inspiring white supremacists in other countries. So they finally, like the day after, they did make the decision, and they publicly stated that they were going to block these channels, the state media across the globe. Now, obviously, it wasn't just us and our letters and our pressure to get them to do this. There were people all over the world trying to get them to move. But this is just an illustration of how important it is to get out in front of the issue quickly and to bring as much public pressure to bear to get the tech companies to move. I think we missed one.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
It's going, for some reason, my slideshow is moving very slower than my fingers. Go ahead, Wendy.
All right. So when Heidi and I started Global Project, the very first report we put out was about generation identity. And I know that all of you are familiar with this white supremacist, transnational, violence inspiring and violent group. They exist in many, many European countries, and they have even managed to get chapters in South America, Australia, and have had a great influence here in the US. So one of the main issues that generation identity pushes is the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which, while the idea is not new, the term was coined in 2011 by Renaud Camus, and it has become sort of a Bible to white nationalists, European and American. And it quickly spread from France throughout Europe. And as I said, here in the US, is also the idea that white people are being replaced by Black and brown people is one of the greatest drivers of violence. And for example, at the Tree of Life shooting here, it's a synagogue here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where so many were killed. And obviously everybody remembers Christchurch in New Zealand, where the shooter was specifically associated with Generation Identity members, had given them donations, and read their writings and particularly watch their videos online. So what we wanted to do was to show that this large, and I should have mentioned that the replacement theory is so pervasive in the US that one of our biggest talk show hosts is Tucker Carlson. I'm sure y'all know him. And no, we cannot tell the difference between Tucker and a white supremacist at this point. He is a favorite of Putin. You may have seen that it was the state media in Russia was instructed to play Tucker's clips as often as possible. But he is a big proponent of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which is also becoming a talking point for many far-right politicians here in the US, as well as in many other countries. So the idea was we had generation identity, multiple countries, multiple languages, violence in many countries there. And while Facebook did take action at the time of Christchurch, because the shooter tried to stream his shooting spree on Facebook. So Facebook took action then, but neither Twitter nor YouTube did. So we released the report, and the next day, Twitter removed all of the Generation Identity accounts, which they were very unhappy about. And then when it came to YouTube, they removed Martin Sellner's account, but inexplicably, they have not removed any of the chapter accounts. There are accounts from almost every European country, some in South America, in Australia. And some of them are even monetized. So as you can imagine, that is a great sore point for us. And it is part of our campaign this year is to get them to finally take down Generation Identity. And more or equally important is to pay more attention to the spread of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory online, because of its potential to inspire violence and inspire bigoted and harmful policies, government policies. Oh, sorry. I was, and another example of some of the work we've done is we wanted to expose the complete lack of commitment that these tech companies have to monitoring and expunging hate speech in non-English languages, particularly in languages that are not spoken or among the less frequently spoken. So again, working with Never Again Association in Poland, we wrote this long report about a guy named Rafał Ziemkiewicz. Some of you may have heard of him. He's quite notorious in Poland. He is racist, anti-Semitic, anti-LGBT, he's a bad guy, but he has a big presence on state TV and in the media. And we had dozens of examples of how he had violated the content rules on both Twitter and YouTube. We issued the report, we talked to Twitter, and they say that it stops short of violating the contents. YouTube said to us that they disagreed with our translation from Polish to English, which was it only reinforced our belief that these companies are not putting what is required to be culturally and language competent into moderating hate speech on their platforms. So sometimes the companies don't want to sort of just capitulate to you. So in this case, we didn't get an immediate response, but we have been watching and doing updates periodically. And what has happened is that the Twitter account has been suspended more than one time. Tweets he's been forced to delete tweets. He's been knocked off of some of the more mainstream YouTube media channels. His own YouTube channel currently has 2 strikes against it for violating its policy, which impacts his ability to make money. Another strike and he'll be gone. So what it does is put it on their radar. And that's another important tactic that we engage in. Also in India, I'm sure you all are familiar with what is happening, the absolute rampant nature of hate speech, anti-Muslim hate speech in India. And again, without the cultural and language competency. But in this case, we actually had a situation where Facebook was very, very involved with the government. So we, along with our allies, we issued a report called Complicit, showing, documenting in several countries how Facebook had willfully refused to address anti-Muslim hate speech, which had resulted in, of course, in Myanmar, the genocide in Myanmar, the pogroms in India. While they issue, and then we involved some legislators to put pressure on them as well. While they didn't admit to, they admitted to their, they have admitted to their role in Myanmar, but they didn't admit to having a bias against the Muslim community. With an additional coalition and advocacy, we were able to secure the resignation of Anki Das, who was head of Facebook in India, who was very tight with the BJP. And additionally, it's very important to us to address multiple forms of hate speech online that against different communities. Just recently, we released 2 reports. One about, both of the reports are about conversion therapy. One is we called it the ecosystem, because how easy is it to find information about conversion therapy, which all of the companies have said that they will take action against. They said that about 2 years ago. And how easy is it to find it? And how is it different in different languages and countries? The second report, the players, was about specifically about conversion therapy providers in multiple countries. What we found is that if it is a non-English language, the material is much more prevalent and much more accessible. In Kenya, we looked at the information in English and Swahili. the Swahili content was vile. It was basically unmoderated, which is cause for great concern because it's illustrative of what we're going to find in other languages, because we haven't looked at all the languages. But interestingly, because of Germany's ban on conversion therapy and because of their strict hate speech laws, there was almost no conversion therapy material in Germany. So it's sort of if there is a will, there is a way to get some of this stuff down. And so we continue to work with the companies to either derank the information on search or to deplatform the providers. Another big campaign, and I think one that hopefully will be of interest to all of you, is to persuade or pressure the tech companies to treat the politically powerful and big influencers the same as every other user. Right now, politicians are given exemptions to the content moderation rules, either because of the nature, they say it's newsworthy or in the public interest. They say that it is, and they also do not check they do not fact check political ads, and this is in any country. And they have whitelists, as I mentioned earlier, people who are basically free to do as they wish online. The reason that this is such a critical move for the companies to make is that influencers, and we use Trump here, but we could use, we could use leaders in many countries, have the biggest platform. People listen to them in a way they don't listen to ordinary folks. They are able to sway popular belief. About 25% of Trump's posts in 2020 contained hate speech, extremist rhetoric, disinformation, so on. And that information was shared more than 900 million times in 1 year. And that's just straight from his account. You can look at any of these leaders, Modi, Bolsonaro, Duterte, Wilders. They all did the same thing, and they have been inspired. They've watched how the American politicians have been given free rein, and they too are taking advantage of these loopholes. And in some cases, really distressingly, Facebook worked directly with Duterte, Modi, and the AfD in Germany, sent staff over because they were willing to spend so much money placing ads, placing disinformation, having multiple accounts, everything that could be done online. These leaders are willing to do it and have the money to do it. And so Facebook sent people actually to their countries, to their campaigns, to show them how to maximize using the platforms, which we all know involves algorithms that send people down rabbit holes, algorithms that continually push. If you look at extremist material, you're going to see more. It's disinformation. And we believe that it ultimately impacts and threatens democracies. So we had a lot of tactics in there. We're happy to talk about them after the presentation, answer questions.
So thanks, Wendy. I'm just going to talk about a couple other of the things that we do at the Global Project before we get to the Q&A. So as I mentioned up at the top, a part of our work is also to influence policy here in the United States. Wendy actually mentioned some work we did to influence legislators to ask questions of the tech companies about anti-Muslim hatred online. Some other policy work we've done, for example, is we put out a policy brief in November of 2020 before Biden came into office that made some suggestions about what to do about rising white supremacist violence and terrorism. Obviously very, very concerned about that phenomenon, which was just heightened by the time January 6th came out. A lot of the things we talked about were cooperation with other governments that are facing these things, dealing with extremism in the military, veterans, we asked that the US government join the Christchurch call, the international coalition started by the French and New Zealand governments to battle terrorist content online. That's something the US did do once Biden was in there, and a lot of the things that we advocated for, and also other organizations we work with here in the States, ultimately made it into Biden's strategy plan that was released in June of 2021 to deal with anti-government and white supremacist extremism. We also testify in front of Congress. We've testified on what to do about veterans who have been radicalized into hate movements, what to do about active duty military. As many of you might have seen and read in the press, a lot of the people who have been charged in the Capitol insurrection here were military veterans. There were also active duty military, as well as police officers. And in the US context, what we found is people with military backgrounds end up, when they get radicalized, end up engaging in quite a bit of terrorism. There have been several veterans involved in major terrorist acts, not to mention what happened at the Capitol. And another part of our policy work is to try to deal with the issue of cops in extremist groups. We co-teach a class on this through the University of Southern California. Obviously, this is a very dangerous situation. And I should just mention, the United States isn't really alone with this problem. There have been a lot of reports about Germany facing the same kind of infiltration of law enforcement and the military. It's something that a lot of countries are seeing right now, where white supremacists are active. And we continue to do lobbying on a whole host of issues, including tech issues, with legislators in the US. And in the coming year, we're going to be doing work to try to protect voters, because there are a lot of concerns here in the United States that at the state and local level, there'll be voter intimidation, including the involvement possibly of extremist groups in that effort in various parts of the US. So then our last big bucket of work or strategy is to build cross-sector transnational coalitions or participate in them. ENACH is obviously one that is very important to us, but we are also involved in a few others. This is an article that, if you read the article, you'd read reference to the Spanish disinformation coalition here, in the Spanish language disinformation coalition here in the United States. Over the last couple years, this group evolved actually out of something called Change the Terms, which we co-founded in 2018 to try to get tech companies to improve their policies and fight hate speech. And through that group, we also started to realize that if you look at content online in Spanish in the United States, it's more riddled with hate and disinformation than English. And it's just part of a pattern by the tech companies, which of course applies outside the United States, to not care about languages other than English. And sort of the further you get from Silicon Valley or the United States, the worse the problem is. So we have been working with the tech companies, as well as officials at the Department of Justice and Congress people, to try to do something to put pressure on the companies to clean this stuff up. We're also members of President Biden's Summit for Democracy, which is a year-long effort that's going on right now to try to bolster democratic regimes around the world, to try to stop the backsliding that's happening with democracies in general, including here in the United States. So that's another effort, and that involves tech work and non-tech work. We are members of the Christchurch Call Advisory Network. So that's another area where we're trying really hard to get, terrorist content offline as much as we possibly can. And that is a very international effort involving, I don't know, maybe 35, 40 governments, maybe more, as well as tech company involvement, and then a whole bunch of civil society organizations. And it's just specifically about terrorist content. So it has a narrow remit, but obviously an important one, and grew out of the fact that the Christchurch mosque massacres were filmed, put out on Facebook Live. And finally, this is something that we shared actually with the whole ENACH list. we're just in the incipient phases of launching the Global Alliance Against Digital Hate and Extremism. We have about, I think, 70 groups who are involved in the effort now. We're not launching for another couple weeks. We'll let you all know when that happens. And this alliance is specifically about dealing with the white lists for politicians that Wendy talked about, to try to stop that. It's outrageous that, you know, I face more stringent hate speech rules in terms of content if I post on a Facebook or Twitter than political figures with huge reach have. We're also looking at the issues of cultural context, language, try to pressure the tech companies to do what they can to improve their content moderation practices in other countries, and looking at other things like how AI systems might spread hate and extremism. So if anybody has any other questions about that, please let us know. And with that, I will stop. That's the overview of our work, and we are happy to answer any questions you all have.
I see hands raised by Raphael and Jonathan.
Shall I go first?
Yeah, go first, Rafal.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I admit I knew about some of the things you talked about, but I think when you put together all the achievements and all the activities of the global, I think that that is really very impressive, and thank you for that. My question is related to the point that Heidi alluded to by the end. So the unequal application of standards across countries and regions, which I think you sort of blamed on a lack of competence, especially linguistic competences, which I'm sure is true, but my impression is that that actually does not exhaust the problem. I think it is very much a problem of will or the lack of will. So my question would be whether you think that can be changed, and how. Thank you.
Well, Rafal, you're going to help us change it, right? Through the alliance, the coalition. You know, look, my experience has been with the tech company. I completely agree with you on will. There's no question. I mean, these are companies that have billions and billions of dollars. If they cared about it, they could invest the resources. It's you know, frankly outrageous that all of us here on this call, everybody who's involved in these efforts, has to spend their time rooting out hate and extremism all over the world because tech companies that make billions of dollars won't pay to do it themselves. And the only thing that I know to do is to keep putting pressure from civil society on the companies to get them to follow their obligations. And where possible, of course, you all in Europe have a different situation. You might have the ability to use regulation and, you know, Digital Services Act or the UK's Online Harms Bill, these other kinds of things that will never apply in the United States because of the way our Constitution is and the First Amendment. I don't know what else to do but to keep shaming them and shaming them. I don't know, Wendy, if you want to add to that.
No, I just will say that I agree. It is a lack of will. In fact, it's in some cases a recalcitrant refusal to address it. I mean, we've been told that some of the companies or some of the issues that we want them to deal with, they're just waiting to see what happens in Europe, which is a bad way to approach solving this problem. So I think, Rafal, you are right. It is a matter of commitment to truly addressing hate speech and violence inspiring content on their platforms.
Jonathan, were you next?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm under a blanket, so I'm not going to, I'm on the beach. So I'm not going to share a picture because it's really embarrassing. But something that Wendy mentioned was that a number of the organizations are still receiving, are still qualifying for monetization, and that a lot of them operating their own websites are undoubtedly also receiving advertising, and in a way to hit them from a monetary standpoint rather than a regulatory standpoint. Are there any actions underway to reach out to advertisers, to reach out to advertising distribution networks and brokers to interrupt some of their ability to generate money through the platforms?
So I could tell you what we've done, and specifically as it pertains to generation identity. And but we always bring up monetization when we're talking to the companies if it applies. But we have had companies like PayPal throughout this process. They have refused their services or taken their services away from a fair number of the groups that I mentioned today, including Generation Identity, which is all of it. They still have some payment processing ability. Additionally, we after the Generation Identity report, we wrote a couple of follow-ups listing all of the companies whose ads were appearing on Generation Identity videos. And what happens is a company, say VRBO, and I mention them because I am beginning to think that they don't care as much as they should. But generally, we blame YouTube for that, because of the way that their advertising algorithms work. They are not as sophisticated as they could be. And I think that they are applied sort of haphazardly. So if you're a company like VRBO and you're buying remnant ad space on YouTube, it can appear anywhere. But a company usually says, but I don't want my stuff to appear on racist sites. Well, then what does it mean? How does YouTube define that? So they have some, which is the way we don't know exactly how they define it, but what we've gleaned from the way that the ads have moved through some of this content is that it has to be very specifically labeled, and in order to get out of the algorithm, and even then it doesn't always work. For example, when we were doing our work on conversion therapy on the videos there, we found several monetized videos on clearly violative material. So what we did to answer your question was we've reached out to all of those companies. The companies, I think that they all use, a great number of them use advertising agencies. The agencies are supposed to take care of it. I think it's just it's a lack of communication between the company, the advertising agency, and YouTube. YouTube is clearly going to get away or do as much as they can, because for every ad that runs, they make money. So if they're not specifically being told not to do it, then they're going to continue. Our biggest success, and when we reach out to companies, they always get back and say, we have a very specific policy about X, Y, and Z. And then sometimes it happens or it goes away for a little while, but then it comes back. The reason that we were able to get as much attention on Generation Identity as we did when that report came out is because YouTube very stupidly was running presidential ads. They were running Biden and Trump ads on Generation Identity material. So not only was it white supremacist, but it was in non-English languages, which gets into how are you supposed to do political advertising. And so we got both presidential candidates made statements about it. It immediately stopped. So again, it's where there's a will, there's a way. It immediately stopped. But then and later on, a couple of months later, they, some special election candidates were showing up on the very same content. So is there pressure like they did with Facebook, to boycott, which I don't know that it actually had that much impact on Facebook's bottom line, but no, I think it would be interesting. Boycotts are tough to do, but I think it's really a matter of how far are we willing to go to highlight the lack of interest on behalf of some of these big companies like Disney, for example. Like, what can we do? Like right now, it'd probably be a good idea to go after Disney, but I don't know, Jonathan, I talked a lot. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did, Wendy. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy.
I see the hand of Steve raised.
So general question to both of you, but I think more specific to Wendy. Did you try to speak directly with one of the biggest players in advertising world, like Taboola, which is the massive ad tech company, who, most of the companies are not going directly to Google to do the advertising. They're using the agencies now, which is the Taboola is one of them, one of the biggest around the world, basically. And for example, they're actually the potential biggest clients to YouTube, Facebook ads people. So, we as engage with the policy folks, but then it's now coming the monetization part of it. So maybe that would actually be more successful and, for example, involve in the conversation the ad tech companies. And if they would put the pressure because they are paying for ads on behalf of the clients.
I think that's a really good idea. And the answer is no, we haven't done it. We haven't really, had the capacity, but I think it could be a very productive line to pursue.
Right.
I just wanted to add, Taboola also is notorious for placing ads on hate websites as well. So it's good that you brought them up, right? They're in like multiple streams of business. They're apparently have no ethics or morals.
They're a massive company, and they basically, as potentially all PR or advertising company, they just see the money, and at the end, who is giving the money doesn't have much, moral to them. The money is money, and then they distribute it through the ads how it is. But maybe if we would involve, because thankfully to us now, brands care much more about the image than before, and actually care about where the ads are being put at, because the people are actually demanding that. Maybe we can put that on the table.
Yeah, it's a very good idea. A very good idea. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks.
We have the hand of Stephen raised. Stephen, please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Excellent presentation. I have a question that might be a little bit complicated, but when I think about the variety of work that you presented that you do, I saw a few different focus areas in my mind that I kind of sorted out. And to me, those fell into three different areas. One that focuses on the policies of the tech platforms. Is the content you're seeing, is the online behavior you're seeing, does it violate the policies that the tech platforms have in place? And you're focused on helping the tech platforms see where they're not living up to moderating against their own policies. The second area that I think about is, activities that are illegal. Discrimination, true threats, and things that need to be brought to the attention of law enforcement organizations within a particular country. And then the third element that I heard was behaviors and content that is anti-democratic. You think about the January 6th insurrection, you think about intimidation of voters at elections, and you could expand well beyond that into things we're seeing in the United States with school boards, intimidation of school boards, public health officials, et cetera. So as I think about that kind of large space that you're monitoring, my question for you is, do you have a framework? Do you think about distinguishing between those different things? And do you do that for different audiences, or is that overcomplicating the problem? I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are with respect to the way the content might map to those different areas.
Well, hey, Steve, I do think that those are distinct issues and problems. And for example, the third kind of bucket you laid out there on voter intimidation, that's some work that Spanish language disinformation group has been working with the DOJ on specifically. And in our work with another coalition called Change the Terms, that and the civil rights violation issue that you talked about sort of in the second bucket are things that we have specifically focused on. So a lot of the members of Change the Terms have spent a lot of time in legislators' offices looking at what to do about violations of civil rights. And some of our partners, for example, were involved in efforts to stop Facebook in particular, but it wasn't just on Facebook, from running ads, for example, for employment or for housing that were race specific and clearly in violation of civil rights law. So, I agree that those are specific and different kinds of problems in the online space, some of it which could literally lead to criminal liability, right? Facebook quickly made a settlement on those discriminatory ads. I just bring up one thing interesting from a partner of ours in the Spanish language disinformation group, the Tech Transparency Project. They have documented extensively that Facebook is allowing human smugglers, largely on America's southern border, to use the platform to do their business. And the Attorney General in Arizona is trying to find a way to stop this, and Facebook is defending allowing what is clear criminal activity to go on. So there's a certain brazenness in that case. It's not so much like, oh, we didn't realize we were doing something. They're literally saying we're going to allow the platform to allow that kind of criminal activity to happen. It's just a matter of, in the United States, this sort of lack of will to investigate, do something about these matters, right? And that's the problem. And let me just say, the things that you laid out, those are such huge problems that it's going to take, a lot of different people, a lot of different organizations, and an amazing amount of monitoring work to even document that these things are happening. I think one of the things that's unfortunate in general is we in civil society have limited capacity in comparison to the size of the problem, right? And as a result, I think there are a lot of things that go on online that we don't know about because we haven't found them. And Frances Haugen's documents, when she released them last fall, showed how, from the outside, we felt like there were lots of problems: cultural competency, content moderation, what's going on in other countries. We did not know the extent of the problem until that stuff was put in the public domain. And I think that, continues to be an issue. I don't know, Wendy, if you wanted to add.
No, I mean, all of that, I agree with everything you said. I thought I heard a question about, do the issues sometimes seem disparate? And so how do we connect all those dots as we do our work? Did I hear that or not hear it?
Well, yes and no. And frankly, I think Heidi really touched on something I was trying to tease out, and that is that there seems to be no end of nefarious uses for the social media platforms. She talked about human trafficking, which was yet another problem that I didn't even allude to. Pardon me. And then the second point Heidi made is that the size of the problem is so big compared to civil society and their means and resources to address it. That was kind of the gist of my question was, is there a focus within your organization on any one of these particular problems, or do you treat the kind of the information ecosystem and all the bad things that happen on it, do you treat them as kind of just a problem writ large that you try to monitor?
I think it does seem like it's a problem writ large, but for us, we look at the issues that we address, we look at through the lens of the spread or growth of far-right extremism. And that in itself is a huge issue, right? And it's domestic, it's transnational, it impacts democracies and countries all over the place. But for our strategic thinking, if we look at it through that lens, then it helps us to focus and narrow our, the reporting we do or the campaigns we take on. For example, we did this report about conversion therapy, which is a very specific harm to the LGBTQ community, and it puts lives at risk. But who is behind it, right? Who are the folks that are going to the legislators or the parliaments and saying, don't ban conversion therapy, we have to have it. So in that case, you have, like in the UK, there's a bill, everybody knows there's the conversion therapy bill, which has gotten all caught up in special interest, where it looked like it was going to sort of sail through, and then groups like Core Issues Trust and others got involved, and they've made headway in stopping its passage. So, and those are the folks who are rabidly anti-LGBT. They work at the policy level, not just what is conversion therapy availability online. So it's for us, it is through that lens of far-right extremism and how are those dots connected from sort of the say hate speech in a tweet online, how is it connected to a larger issue?
Perfect, that helps, thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised, but there are also no questions in the chat.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming today. It was, Oishik has a question.
Yes, there's a question. My question is to both Heidi and Wendy. A lot of disinformation and hate speech is circulated using social media platforms. How does one deal with that VRT privacy?
Well, privacy issues online are a massive other boondoggle, a situation in which regulations, they're obviously much better in the European Union and other places than they are in the United States. But it's a whole other ball of wax. We aren't experts on the privacy front, but we work with a lot of partners who have been trying to devise legislation or work with regulatory bodies here in the United States to address this. And I'm glad you brought it up, Wojciech, because it's a serious issue. And basically the way it works right now in the US is you have almost no privacy in the online space, unfortunately. And so anyhow, it's important. I don't know, Wendy, if you want to add something to that.
I can't add. I wish that I could. It's such a, just personally, I hope that whatever the EU passes, they just decide to apply to the rest of the world when it comes to the privacy stuff, because we have so little protection. And like Heidi said, we're not experts in that particular aspect of it. But I do want to thank everybody. It's wonderful to have to see all these faces, and we are grateful to Enoch for inviting us to speak, and we're grateful to you all for listening. And we're all about building relationships. If y'all have ideas that maybe something would be good to work with us on, we'd be very interested to hear from you. But otherwise, we will see you at the next Enoch meeting.
I'm just seconding Wendy's comments. Thank you so much, and thanks to Enoch.
Yeah, thanks so much to you two, and to Mustafa. It was really interesting, and yeah, I think a great first event of this kind. And thanks to everyone as well who joined us today. And yeah, stay tuned for our next events, because we'll have our annual conference later this year, and we'll have another webinar that will be led by our member Jugendschutznet. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, and yeah, have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 So Charlotte,